This is David Arellano. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Excellent. Thank you very much. At
Are
my
we
side
are
here,
we on a good line?
we are in a good line. We hear you excellent. Do you hear us?
Yes. Well, I hear you.
Perfect. Okay.
If I'm supposed to hear anyone else, I don't.
Okay. Erhard is here with me. He wants to say hello.
Well, he's very quiet. Hi, Erhard.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for
Wel-
tuning in.
Welcome to the new world.
Yes. In
For
all senses of the word.
yeah.
Yes, indeed. And it's very good of you to let me poach on your seminar.
Oh, you give it value.
Well,
it is very
I'm
nice to have you here with us, Jim.
Well, I would like to be there actually, but I cannot. And this is a pallid substitute, but it may be the best we can do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
How long will you be in Mexico City?
I'll stay on till Wednesday, till Friday, and then I'll go to Los Angeles for a couple of days, and then I go back to New York, and then
And-
back to Paris.
And back to Paris,
Yeah.
and then we'll get a new DVD soon.
Yes, you will get well, there is a new DVD out, yes, but it's in French, so I'll send you when the English is out.
Okay. Well, I enjoy listening to French, even though most of it goes past me. But I can wait.
Well, I can send it in French. I mean, I just thought that it might be just as well to send you the English version, but you can have one in French. There's no problem at all.
Well,
So
I would like that.
You'll get it in the post.
I would like that
Okay.
because I think those are some of the best things that have been done, and you're really doing an important service, my friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you. This is nice to hear. I agree, but it's not. I couldn't say
Good.
it myself.
Yeah, I think you should say it. I don't think there's any need for false modesty in this world, of that sort at least.
Okay.
It's a job that very few people could do, and no one could do better than you.
Okay. There's nothing more I can add.
You have embarrassed him, Jim.
Yeah, good.
I can tell you.
And David,
Yeah.
how is life these days in the, do you say C-Day?
Yeah, C-Day, it's correct.
Yeah.
Well, we are very happy here. This seminar with Erhard has been very productive, and we have here with us also several colleagues from a public university in Mexico called Autonomous Metropolitan University. So our colleagues are here also and are very happy to hear you too and say hello.
I hope you also have some wine.
No, we
No.
don't drink here.
Oh.
They only drink water and fruit juice, believe it or not.
I think you need to reform them, Erhard.
Yes.
It's you cannot do good research without wine.
I agree.
And
We'll take your advice a little bit
All right,
later, I think.
I
Okay.
used to tell my students that until you have drunk wine with someone for 4 or 5 years, you cannot do research with them, because you first have to establish your personal relations before you can work together.
Okay.
But that sometimes is a little longer than you have.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. So, Jim, you comfortable enough to begin our discussion?
Anytime
Okay.
that you like. For me, I don't know when it will begin or what it will end. This is a conversation that I assume we began 5 minutes ago and will end when we get tired.
Excellent. I like that spirit. So allow me to explain to our colleagues the idea we talked about some days ago. The basic idea is that we will have a conversation, very open conversation, perhaps with one or two topics, basic topics we can have as a guide, but not necessarily we are going to stop on that topic. We chose the following idea as the pretext for our conversation. I was telling Jim and Erhard that in Mexico, following up this wave of new public management that it has been so influent in Mexico and in Latin America, there is a bold discussion regarding the difference between institutions and organizations. Basically, under the idea that institutions are basically the rules of the game, and if that you design right incentives, people will follow, will change their behavior through those incentives, and therefore you can build up, you can design, and you can create institutions rather rationally through this structure of incentives. I told Jim and Erhard that this might be a very good idea to begin our discussion. I mean, institutions and organizations are quite different. Can you design rationally institutions, and institutions do creating correct or right incentives for changing the behavior of people in public organizations, for example. So this will be basically the idea that we will follow in our conversation. I don't know, Erhard or Jim, if you agree that this is basically what we discussed, what we talked some days ago. Is this okay, Jim?
I think that Erhard and I probably can talk about anything without necessarily saying anything relevant to it. But that's a kind of question that seems to me Erhard should respond to first, because he's the expert on local orders and how the same kind of theory works for public and private and multiple networks of various sizes. So, Erhard, what's your take on this?
Well, thank you for letting me lead here. My impression is that I don't think we're going to have a big controversy around this, but we'll see. My take on this is that this is language of economists. And as always, as very often, this language is oversimplifying complicated processes that overestimate the clarity of what's going on. It forgets that you do not command an actor system as if it were a machine and you push a button and it aligns. So incentive structures is, of course, we talked about it this morning. We said that's one of the few instruments a policymaker has. So he or she may use this as an instrument, but he or she should also be aware of the fact that incentive structures are nothing but incentive structures, and actual behavior will not necessarily fall in line because you create an incentive structure. So the question then becomes, how does the incentive structure relate to what's already going on? And can the new incentives be readily integrated in the games that are going on, or are they totally contradictory with them, in which case there's going to be a big problem? If they are too easy to integrate, then they don't do much good. If they are too different, then they won't be probably very well implemented. So I don't really know what to do with that language because of the importance. I mean, I'm not going to talk about the limits of our power and intentions. You know more about this, and you have written more about it than I have. I'm always aware of the 100,000 unanticipated consequences that any kind of voluntary design will have. So my answer in a nutshell would be, I would say, yeah, design an incentive structure, but the problem starts then.
But if I hear you right, Erhard, there are sort of two broad related questions. One is the question of complexity, that you're talking about relatively complex systems that are unlikely to respond to relatively simple-minded manipulations in relatively simple ways. So there's the problem of complexity. The other problem is the question of the extent to which human action is based on incentives, can be in a non-tautological way. That is, you can define incentives in such a way that any behavior is interpretable that way. But I think we know rather well that a lot of human behavior is driven by expectation of consequences, and consequences are what you manipulate through incentives. But a lot of human behavior doesn't fit that model very well. A lot of human behavior is much more following the rules of identity, what I go around calling the logic of appropriateness. And that kind of behavior doesn't fit incentive manipulation very well. So you have a problem of the extent to which you can manipulate incentives, the extent to which incentives control action precisely, and the extent to which incentives are even relevant to a lot of the behavior that we observe in organizations.
I agree. I would add that even people who are responding to incentive structures do not necessarily respond in the sense and in the direction that the incentive structure wanted, and that there are many ways that you can use rules, directives, incentives to do things that are not quite in line with the intentions of the designer of the incentive structure.
Yes. And one of the things I think that is lurking in the back of this is the extent to which an incentive-based approach tends to drive people to behave in response to incentives, so that in some sense, if you design an organization with the idea that people are responsive to palpable incentives, over time they will probably become so. And that poses some problems for people who are concerned, as I think David is, in things like justice and equity, which tend to not be responsive to incentive structures. They tend to be responsive more to identity structures.
Yeah, I would like to ask you a little bit to go further in one topic, because accepting the issue that unexpected consequences, for example, or that people's behavior not necessarily is affected entirely by incentives. The problem is that in several countries, including Mexico, several important public administration reforms are taking this strategy as the base. So not only in government, for example, in universities. Here, my colleagues at the Metropolitan Autonomous University are very aware of the importance of reforms that would like to say, okay, academics should publish more, so we should create incentives for academics to publish in very good journals, and that would be the cornerstone of a good evaluation for you. Imagine this in a general way for example, in education, where you have vouchers, proposal for vouchers in education in order to create quasi-market structures. I mean, the problem is, I guess, that we have now these reforms in action, and they are creating what Jim is saying. People now accepting that perhaps their behavior should be following incentives structures. I mean, now people might be convinced that incentives is the only way through the only way what an organization might create in order to make them cooperate or make them behave in the way an organization would like them to behave. So, which is the human consequence or the organizational consequence of people following incentives as if those incentives actually were the basic reason for their behavior, their action.
You remind me of what I have frequently called one of the more fundamental theorems of organization theory, and that is that if you measure behavior and reward the good performance on the measures, you will corrupt the measures. That the members of the organization will figure out a way to score well without doing well. And that, I think, is a very general organization phenomenon. And insofar as incentives involve measuring performance, you mentioned, for example, measuring research productivity by counting number of papers in various, or citations or something like that. What we observe, of course, is that our colleagues have figured out various ways to do well on those measures without really doing any research. And that is not any different from what happens in schools when you test and what happens in business firms when you construct profit and loss statements.
I couldn't agree more. I was going to think, I was going to go on in a different line, but I mean, this was one thing I wanted to say. So I totally agree, and I think we are faced with the pathological consequences of over-measuring performance in academia. This is a world I know, and when I see how recruitment commissions start working now with computers or with computers and going into the file and looking just how much this person is scoring without even looking at the curriculum vitae, I sort of shudder. So this point is perfectly well taken. What I was wondering is to what extent this talk about incentive structures doesn't really take into account what people actually do. I mean, it is an economist's view. In actual life, what you do is you combine, you mix. You know you have to abide to some controls, you have to abide to some incentives, yes, but you pay lip service. There is hypocrisy, there is face construction, and you go on doing what you think you have to do in order to do a good job. And your conception not only of your identity, but also of what is a good job. And the colleagues that look at you, I mean, there is local control. So, I mean, I don't know what to do with this complete reliance on incentive structure. Being a responsible executive in any kind of domain would mean that you have to know that there are incentive structures that you can use and you design, but the real problem then really starts afterwards. How do you monitor the thing? How do you control the many dysfunctional consequences that any incentive structure has necessarily? How do you monitor this? This is the real problem.
Which is the new game you are creating, actually, isn't it? You are creating a new game, and this new game is not necessarily better or worse. I mean, it's simply you have created a new equilibrium, perhaps, and you have to deal with the good and bad consequences of the design. Let me ask you one question that I really would like to hear you about. I think one of the basic assumptions this vision of incentives has is the sharp distinction between organizations and institutions. With all this old, new, and post-new institutionalism, I would like to hear you about your position regarding the difference or the relationship between these two very important concepts that I guess is part of the problem with this idea of creating behavior through incentives.
You want to go first, Tim?
I think you better, Erhard.
Oh, no, you're the specialist of institutions.
Well, but I am notorious for thinking that definitional niceties are not of very great interest. So that, you know, for me, an institution is amongst other things, a collection of rules, and organizations can be seen as instruments for acting within rules, but organizations are also collections of rules. So I don't make a sharp distinction between institutions and organizations. I would say some people emphasize the institutional aspects of organizations, which means they emphasize the relatively stable rules and how they evolve over time. But I would ask, you know, suppose I make a distinction, what difference does it make?
Well, I mean, in answering that question, I mean, I don't see that much difference, but the people who speak like that see a difference. And for them, organization is hierarchy. And an institution is rules of the game. I'm not at ease with this vocabulary, but this is what they say. So you have to change the rules of the game, and then you have organizations that will implement these new rules of the game. And that, to me, is a vision of reality that I just don't know what to do with. Because it is not, you have not an institutional context, and then you have an organization that is sort of determined by this institutional context. It's all interactive. The institutional world, in their sense, is influenced, impacted by what's happening on the other levels. So it's just, this is how should I say? It's a hierarchical vision of society. You have all-encompassing rules of the game. Who is ever going to change these all-encompassing rules of the game? Nobody ever can change this. So all you can do is try to initiate processes whereby some of these aspects will be changed. I have a very strong. I don't really know what to do with all this, because it doesn't correspond to my view of how things happen when you reform.
I'm afraid that's true of both of us.
Yeah.
But let me support also what you said really at the start. Intelligent, thoughtful people have tried to make that distinction, and our job is partly to try to figure out what germ of an idea might lie in that distinction, even though we don't see it very clearly. And the germ of an idea, which I'm not sure that it reflects what actually people think of, is a difference in rate of change for me. That is, that the rules of institutions certainly change over time, but they change at a relatively slower rate than the rules of organizations. I think that's a possible distinction one could make. They obviously interact, but the difference in the rate of change probably has some consequences. But that's the best I can do, because my instincts are that's not a distinction that I would find very useful.
Okay. In any case, I wonder if we are dealing here with, we can call it paradigms, and my concern will be that paradigms are kind of force ideas, you know, that try to shape reality actually to what the concept of this paradigm would like to see this reality to become. What about if what we are talking about here is not necessarily, obviously, a clear distinction that you can make in academic terms, but what you are facing here, it's kind of ideological paradigms that would like to shape the reality in the way they would like to see the reality to be, I mean.
Well, by listening to you, I was thinking of at least one of the two, but probably both, films that Jim made. It's all about what can you do, and the vision I take away from these films, and I totally agree with them, is that these paradigms overestimate our capacity of designing. These things, I mean, it's very complicated to have a balanced view of this, because we all know that there are people who have been able to move an organization really in a different direction, or to move a country in a different direction, to obtain a different climate in a society. This exists, we know. At the same time, maybe we just make up narratives around the persons, and it's a much more complex process. Probably it is. But these complex processes need some identification with people. So this is, I think this exists. But at the same time, when I hear, if I were polemical, I would say technocrats talk about this design of institutions, I wonder whether they know really what they're talking about.
Jim, would you like to?
You are perplexed, Jim.
You are perplexed by the.
No.
Are you now embarrassed?
I'm sitting here simply nodding and saying, "Keep going," because I think that the concept of design applied to an organically changing system almost always falsifies the system. It doesn't mean that you can't intervene in some ways to change the direction, but the design conjures up an image that somehow you can put down on a piece of paper or something equivalent a picture and then produce that picture. And I've never seen that happen in an organization.
Well, Jim, let me just go a step further. I am now directing a Master of Public Affairs. And this is exactly what I try to teach the students. But at the same time, I have trouble with it. And I'll tell you the kind of trouble that I have. What I'm trying to do is create policymakers that are skeptical enough about their own possibility to control things and to design.
Yes.
And I tell them, you can design whatever you want. The problem starts once you stop designing and you start implementing. And therefore, please take care of the process, not of the design. So that's one point. But at the same time, I tell myself, if I want to have policymakers who are willing to do things, they need the design part just to start going. So how do you combine this? How do you avoid producing students who are so skeptical and so aware of the limitations of what they can do that they stop doing anything?
I think that's a tough thing, and it's partly tough because we have pretty much built a society which believes that you start with the goal.
Yeah.
You start with the end point, and then construct the way to the end point. And I think what you want is a conception of design that doesn't know exactly where it's going, but knows some kinds of things it can do to initiate movement, and perhaps can to some extent direct the movement. I used to contrast the attitude of a powerboat skipper with a sailor, a sailing boat. A sailing boat, you cannot go wherever you want to go, but you try to intervene or interpose your own movements with the winds to get you somewhere that you might like to go. And the powerboat says, I want to go there, and just puts on the power and goes straight ahead. And I think that the powerboat approach simply doesn't work in organizations.
I remember this metaphor, I believe you and John Olsen once written on about designing organization is more like growing a nice garden rather than an architectural work of building a tall building.
It's it's modest interventions in a system over which you have small controls, but you might have some. And I would say, although I won't attribute this to Johan, you may not know where you want to go. That we all have experienced that our objectives change over time. And the design, the intervention in an organization has to anticipate that our objectives will change over time. How do you take the first step when you don't know where you're going? And that kind of question, I think, is a difficult question, but it's the kind of question you'd want those students to sort of think about.
It's tough. It's tough because it needs a high tolerance to uncertainty.
Yes, and a recognition that God does not create the preference function, that it evolves just as everything else does.
Do you think our students with this kind of lesson might be happy people, not frustrated people?
Well, I don't know. The kind of thing, I'm not sure that it really relates to what we've been talking about, but I used to put a lot of emphasis saying, look, you don't know exactly where you're going, but you can make the way you go there beautiful. So that it really matters the quality. If you're going to write a memorandum, it should be a literary masterpiece. If you're going to post a notice, it should be an artistic masterpiece. If you're going to deal with someone, you should make them better as a result of that dealing with them. So that every moment of your experience, you worry about the beauty of those interactions, those artifacts that you're producing, and so on, and that will in fact lead you to nudge the organization along somewhere that might be more interesting. I don't have, I'm not sure I can derive that from a set of axioms, but I believe it.
Well, it's belief that we need. That's, by the way, probably the best. Well, as everything, belief is something that makes you start things. Belief and discontent with what is, or at least your understanding of what is. But just to go back to David's question, I don't think that these students are reacting uniformly. Some of them are very irritated when you tell them that. And that kind of discourse that we're having here right now is just not tolerated by some. Others love it and eat it up. And a few can be convinced. So for some it's a natural in a way. For some it's an impossible thing to understand. And then you have those that you can win over in a way, okay. I would say.
In the short run and in the long run, would you think that in this world, competitive world, let's say, students will ask us perhaps, please give me a good instrument. I mean, give me something to compete in the world. Give me some specific instrument or procedures or which are the 10 steps for a good organizational design. I mean, I have heard this kind of a request from my students. Now on, I have some of my students here that have asked me exactly that. I mean, you can send me to the streets without instruments. And what you are giving me is nice, it's interesting, it sounds nice, but how I going to compete with this if I don't see a clear instrument? I mean, it's an unfair vision, but I guess if our students will ask us to develop clearer instruments or clearer procedures of the kind of vision of organization we have.
Well, I mean, I can react to that. I have done a lot of adult training, executive training, and I have been confronted with that question, and it has never bothered me. And I think when they went out of the seminar, they were not frustrated. But that's just a quib in a way. So to be a little more serious, you have disciplines and you have skills, and the skill set I have is not a skill set that can be put in recipes and given to a student and say, apply. It's a reflective skill set that can teach students to become reflective. And I think that this is an important competence for somebody who aspires to be responsible for something in the world. If he or she is not reflective, he or she is not going to be a good official. So for me, that is the way I argue myself out of this question. But there are other people the students confront that whose skill set is giving them a method to analyze a thing. I have a method, but it is much less formalized and structured than statistics. Statistics is something where you go into a course and you come out with a few formulas, things that you apply easy. Sociology and organizational analysis, the management of change, policy making, these are all very complicated things, and there is no easy solution in my mind, and I would even resent that somebody come and say, I have the solution, here it is, here's the package, you just go and do it.
I think very, very similarly, I think, Erhard. When I was younger, I used to teach statistics, and I did it quite deliberately because when I taught organizations or sociology or whatever, the students, by the end of the time, I hoped they had learned something, but it wasn't obvious. When I taught statistics, at the end of the time, the students could say, yes, I now know something I didn't know at the start. And that gave me, that sort of reassured me that I knew something about teaching. Now I'm inclined to say to students that in any activity, there are what a concert pianist would call finger exercises. They are things you know how to do, and you have to do, and you have to keep yourself agile at. But they have very little to do with serious playing the piano. But except without them, you can't play the piano. And so many of the skills, the optimization skills that we teach, are like finger exercise. You should know how to do them. You should be able to do them if the occasion arises, but they aren't central. They are not the central part of your life is creating greater beauty, and that is a more complicated activity, and you undoubtedly need to know all kinds of technique in order to do that well, but the technique alone will not do it for you. And that speech, one way or another, I think I make all the time.
Yeah. What I tell my students is that they should have faith, that what we are teaching them here it's useful in the real world. And well, I haven't found a student that tells me that.
Well,
no.
you can organize things in such a way that they have an experience. If you can organize experiences, I'll give you an example. My students in the MPA, they go on a study trip. And right after the study trip, they start, the study trip takes them into a city, in a big city, and they have to do a policy analysis of a policy problem in a big city, waste or water or whatever. And it so happened, it wasn't planned, but it turned out that way. When they came back, they started a course in comparative public management. And I was amazed. After the first course, a number of students came and said, "This is a great course," for the first time. And I got the answer of why this happened when they presented their results from the study trip, because a number of them said, "And this we have and this we have seen analyzed in the public management course, but we've seen it." And therefore, for them, this became real. And they understood something. And that is an experience. If you organize the teaching around such experience, will be something that can help them understand even things that are not, formalizable in a few formula or recipes. So it's, you can, to a certain extent, try and organize the teaching around such moments where they say, "Oh yeah, I see what he means. Or I see it here on something I know." This is a little trick I have learned.
I think it's very impressive. I've seen some of my colleagues who do very similar things, which impress me very much. I have never done that. The first line of every course that I taught was that I am not now, nor have I ever been relevant. So that I would not respond to questions of what use is this? Or if someone said, "What possible use can I make of this?" my answer would be, "That's your problem, not my problem."
I like that option also, Jim.
Well,
I use that a lot.
Some of my younger colleagues said that's the advantage of age. That students allowed me to get away with that. They had a little more trouble.
Yeah.
And, I think the kind of thing that Erhard does is extraordinarily valuable. But I also think that occasionally you have to say, we are dealing in ideas, and ideas are things that individuals have to make meaningful that the faculty cannot, or whatever.
Sure. Jim, Erhard, do you agree if we open one or two questions from the public?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Just
if you like to make it in Spanish also, we can translate it to Jim, no problem, or you can simply come up over here and sit where I am and talk directly to to the microphone, please
Because
feel free.
You have to talk into the mic.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds interesting, but I can't hear it.
Yeah, no, we will translate it, or somebody, if she or he would like, simply come here and to the microphone and make the question. Here we have a professor coming right away.
If it's sufficient confusion with organization and institutions, let me introduce another. What about systems? I was formed with Russell Lakoff, and the thing is, institutions and organizations are systems, all very closely related to systems concepts at the Ecovian way.
Thank you.
Oops, I hear a lot of rattle, but okay. I, like many of my colleagues, am a little nervous about the concept of systems because it got too generalized. But I think if you use it in a relatively disciplined way, then I would say that the kind of thing that Erhard does is he really works on theories of systems. He's talking about how actors are tied together in complex ways, in interdependent ways, and the whole beauty of so-called systems analysis is feedback loops. And I think much of the more interesting things that we do in studies of organizations are when we identify feedback loops and their consequences. So I don't have any difficulty at all seeing the kinds of things we do as having a genetic relationship to systems analysis. Some of the grander systems folks, I think, get carried away, but I suppose they think I do.
Sorry for the rumbling, but we had to turn the mics around. Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. I myself have tried to, well, we have used systems a lot, and this is, of course, what we do, but we try to get away from the word because of the cybernetic idea behind it, which is too controlled. Real systems, the way the things that we can analyze, are never totally controlled, never totally under control, as you know, and therefore I'm perfectly at ease to talk about systems, but at the same time I'm always afraid that there is some misunderstanding might creep in because of the cybernetic idea that is also associated with systems. So system is a word that has so many ramifications in meaning that you probably have to use a paraphrase to sort of specify what you're really talking about, I would say.
There is a famous book by Crozier and Friedberg, after all.
Okay. Yes. Yes. I accept. No. It's not that systems you can't use the word, but you have to be careful to specify what kind of system you're talking about, I think. And that we did in Actors and Systems.
Another question? Yeah? Okay, there is a question from a colleague. Do they, or we all, see some particular trends in the study of organizations?
Well, that's a big one. I'll go first.
Do we have an elaboration of what the trends are, or was this a question of what the trends are?
Yes, the question is about the trends. Are there
Okay.
trends in the study of organizations?
That's a long answer.
Yes. Well, it's. I mean, you could say the easy thing, but if I try not to say the easy thing, I would say. There are, well, let's put it this way. I would see two trends. One is probably going into the direction of the dissolution of organizations. They are things that we call different things now, and we do not believe anymore in this mythical hierarchy that some people talked about, and that was very important in a historic perspective, as a scapegoat also to deconstruct. So that would be the first. And the second, I would say, in organization studies, is a trend to, well, is the fusion of economic sociology and organization theory, meaning that organization theory has become, has widened its scope to the study of markets. And that is, again, probably very significant of a trend in society, which is bureaucracies have dissolved or are in the process of dissolving somewhat, and having less importance in the social fabric in comparison to markets. When you compare the old the old organized societies that we had in the 50s and 60s, well-regulated, well-controlled, relatively well-controlled, with corporate actors negotiating regulations, and you compare to what we have now, it's a totally different world. And that is reflected in what's going on in organization theory, which has become more and more economic sociology. And with that comes a third trend that I would add, and that is the growing importance of network studies, network methods. There's a methodology that is becoming more and more commonplace, more and more people use it in the study of markets, but also more generally, and that is probably a trend that, and there's some very, very interesting work being done right now in this direction. So this would be a first answer from my side.
I think my answer would be fairly similar. I would say that we're moving toward more complex networks, more chaotic processes. That I've recently had a number of conversations with Chinese colleagues trying to understand ambiguity, things like contradiction and fuzziness, and how that feeds into organization. I think that I'm not sure that I have counted right, but I think that quantitative studies of organizations are declining. There are more and more case studies, single case studies, and efforts to rationalize and develop methods for those. I'm not sure how long that trend will continue, but I think it's interesting. I think that there's some interesting location trends over the last, 50 years or so. Organization studies, particularly in the United States, have moved increasingly toward business schools. And the political science contributions to sort of organization studies, as that group is understood generally, have declined. Psychological contributions have declined. Sociological ones have increased. But the most obvious structural thing is the movement to business schools, and therefore the increased emphasis upon business, and particularly business from the point of view of the firm rather than from the point of view of the industry or the society. The foolishness of predicting trends is that what we do always is to extrapolate current trends, and what we're interested in are changes in trends. And I don't really know what changes there will be in those trends. But I think those are, for me, the relatively obvious things that are going on.
Yeah. It is a very tough question. I have been in the editorial board of Organization Studies for the last 3 years now. And every week I receive, 3-4 papers to review. And my sense is that, I agree with Jim, business schools are dominating heavily in at least in this sample I have been part of Organization Studies. The other thing I will guess is that, and very important for us here at CIDE and in WAM also, in University, Metropolitan University also, is that public organization studies are kind of minority now in organization studies, very little minority. Right away we will have a workshop in May in France organized by Organization Studies regarding bringing the state back in organization studies, because very important professors and students of organizations began in public sector studies, and now the current issue is rather analyze basically organizations as firms, and there is very few quantity of good studies in public organizations, less in other kind of organizations like judicial organizations or international organizations from the expertise of organizational studies. So I would say that one important trend will be to recover the study of the so-called, I quote, other organizations rather than just analyzing firms, public organizations, international organizations, judicial organizations, you name it.
Well, I may just only add that my concern with that is not so much that business schools are becoming a major actor. They have been a major actor for a long time in organizational studies, if seen from my perspective. But I would be very glad if they really took seriously the study of business organizations. But the problem is they don't study them well. And therefore, the knowledge that they bring to us about business is not very good. The kind of knowledge that they produce is not good knowledge. It is superficial knowledge about business, not really good knowledge. And that's really dangerous.
Okay. Well, Jim, Erhard, I think this has been a very nice way to chat with you. It is a pleasure to hear you, Jim.
I'm not sure
to hear that you are very, very healthy and well.
Are we currently transferring the microphone?
Did you hear us well? Hello?
Hello?
I think we have a little problem.
Hello?
Hello, did you hear us?
I could not hear whatever happened recently.
Oh, okay. So do you hear us now? Something happened.
Now I think I hear Erhard, but that's all.
Okay. Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we had, I don't know what happened, but there was an interruption, visibly an interruption. We were, David was just saying thank you, and I join in to say it was a great pleasure, even only over telephone, to chat with you. Thanks for tuning in, as they say in the radio business.
Oh, it's now time for the advertisements, you mean? Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's always a pleasure, Erhard. And thanks, David.
I promise you'll get the DVD soon.
Okay.
In English, obviously, in English.
No, in French.
In French, okay.
The English one will be out in a couple of months. You'll get that one too.
Yeah, and I should thank David. Earlier today, a charming young woman who spoke Spanish talked to me,
Okay.
and she put up with my whatever it was I was speaking, and I think we concluded that everything was all set.
Okay, perfect.
But in any
Jim.
event, she was charming, and thank her for me.
Well, Jim, thank you very much. I'm very, very glad to hear you and hear that you are doing fine. And well, perhaps you will accept my invitation to come to Mexico soon.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, Jim. Thank you very much.
Hasta la vista.
Hasta la vista.
Hasta la vista.
Thank you. Very nice.